Spain is the fastest growing economy among the euro area, expected to see GDP growth of 2.9% this year, extending explosive growth since 2021. To debrief on 12 Minutes With, we're joined by the Spanish Economy Minister, Carlos Cuerpo. Minister, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, you've had a very strong growth performance, but before we get into that, I want to ask you about the national security strategy that was put out by the U.S. government. They say Europe is weak. How do you respond?
Well, there is an easy response, I think, to statements, documents that come from abroad, is that we need to somehow go from reacting to outside shocks to really get to action. There is urgency to really provide and to really push for our policy agenda, and we should be talking, we should be having specific deadlines, we should be moving ahead with our roadmap.
But when they tell you, and you're the Spanish Economy Minister and also an important country in the European structure, when you hear they are weak, the leadership is weak, there's too much regulation, there's successive migration, the green policies are wrong, they are not growing. Are you offended?
Well, this is very personal, but the reaction that it instills in me is a reaction of really proving them wrong.
Okay.
I think that's where we should be moving, and that's why we have to really enact all those policies and start moving. I think that's a proper reaction to all these statements. We have to keep on moving.
There's a question permeating in Brussels which says this has nothing to do with national security, it's political interference, and the goal of this administration is to dismantle the EU from within. Is that a credible threat?
Well, again, I think Europeans were very much aware of the importance of unity within the EU and how much the European Union protects us. And I think from the Spanish perspective, there is no case whatsoever in terms of really thinking about any other scenario but going ahead in terms of integration, further integration within the EU.
We've seen this year this issue of unanimity is becoming a real problem in the EU. Is unanimity killing the EU from within? That's a real threat.
Well, again, I think we are trying to find ways on important decisions such as the funding for Ukraine to avoid the blocking of these support, and we will find it. I'm sure in the next few weeks we will find ways to...
You think the first analysis will happen?
I think in the end we will be able to go ahead with the ensuring financing for Ukraine, which is the most important element at this point, because it has to do with Ukraine's security, but also with European security and thus European economy.
But you're saying funding, you're not saying the reparations loan. So that means maybe it's not a reparations loan, it's something else. The Belgians continue to say, we don't like it.
We're working hard to be able to go ahead with the reparations loan. From the Spanish side, we're pushing ahead as well. We think that there is space to go ahead, both legally and politically. We will have to, again, go ahead together with our colleagues, with the rest of the member states, and see to what extent, again, we can do that in the next few weeks.
Okay, and we've got to talk about Spain. There's been a real reversal between the core and the south. How sustainable, having said that, is a 3% GDP growth for this country?
Well, it's not just a short-term story. It's now a structural change in the Spanish economy and how we are being able to lift up our potential GDP growth, which is the key for sustainability of our public finances as well going ahead. So it's not just being able to get out of COVID without scars, but really modernizing our economy. That's the actual success story of Spain.
How long can you keep it up, though?
So what we're aiming at is a potential GDP growth of around 2%, which is doubling pretty much what we had pre-COVID. So that's essential. That's key for us.
You know very well, however, your critics would say there is no structural story. It's European money and a boom in tourism. What do you respond to that?
Well, there are many signals to actually look at where you can see this structural change. For example, you talked about tourism, but what we have now in Spain is a boom in non-tourism services, which are higher value-added services. Actually, we export more. Despite of being in record years in tourism, we export more in non-tourism services, which are IT, financial, accounting services, than in tourism. So the jobs are going to basically high-end sectors, innovation. Spain is the third fastest growing country in terms of its startup ecosystem for the past 3 years. So that's all these indicators really pointing towards a structural change.
But the funding from the European Union, obviously after the pandemic, played a big role in the economy. You also concede that the funding, the Next Generation EU, which is a program built around it, will end next year in 2026. What impact is this going to have in Spain?
So we have a fully fledged structural reform agenda labor market, business environment, startup law that are creating the conditions also for this growth to be sustained going forward. And then on the investment side, a strong investment push, 80 billion in transfers for Spain so that we could actually really put the stress on those areas that we think are sectors of the future, including the digitization and the green of course, energy, which are the key vectors for Spain also going forward.
So you're not concerned this funding is no longer there and that's going to have a negative impact on you?
Well, you know, there are two elements here. So one is we will be discussing the medium-term financial framework for the EU, and that will start actually in December in the European Council as well. And we think that there is need for Europe to be somehow forward-looking and ambitious in terms of the size of its budget. You know very well that Draghi has been putting on the table financing needs for our investments that are above 5% of GDP, and our budget barely reaches 2%, and that's including all different items. So we need to somehow be consistent on both fronts. We will be fighting for an ambitious MFF.
You also call for joint debt.
And
are you still
of course, and there are many elements associated with the element of mutualization of or joint issuance of debt. One of them is to reinforce, of course, the euro. As a strong currency going forward, because what we're seeing is that we need a liquid market in terms of euro-denominated debt, and that will come again as well from further mutualizing debt or from further issue.
And just to end this chapter before we move on the Spanish economy in particular, there's the numbers which objectively are very good, but there's also the politics. At the start of the year, I remember you told me we will have a budget. We are going to present it. It's going to be successful. It's the end of the year. There's no budget. You've been rolling over constantly now. Your critics would say this is not just wrong, but it's undemocratic.
Well, you know, we are now in the process of really putting forward the draft budget.
But we've heard this before many times.
I know. There is a clear commitment from the President to actually, beginning of next year, really present the draft budget in Congress so that we can discuss it and hopefully agree on it. You know, also luckily what we have in Spain is these provisions within our law to be able to roll over the budget from one year to the other, and that actually...
but a rollover is an exemption. The criticism is that this is becoming too normal, and that is not very democratic. What are your response?
The constitutional obligation is to present a draft. We will present a draft, and from then on, hopefully we can agree on it, because it's important for citizens to be able to see what the policy objectives are in terms of money, in terms of where we allocate, what items are prioritized throughout the budget. In fiscal terms, we're complying also with EU fiscal rules, so we are within the group of good pupils, with good students in terms of fiscal and also macro imbalances. That's just
but you know it's rare to not have a budget for so many years. Also.
We know it's an exception, as you just called it, and we will try again to have it approved. We will present it, and we will go ahead with our partners and associates within the Parliament to be able to get it ready.
But you're also different to the rest when it comes to migration. In the European Union, we've seen now a much harder line. Obviously, there's a conservative majority now that is pushing for repatriation, asylum seeking has to be monitored much more closely, family reunification, it's the same. In Spain, however, we're seeing the numbers when it comes to migration growing, but you say that is adding to the economy. Is migration for you an opportunity or a problem?
Migration is a big opportunity for Spain.
You don't think it's a problem?
To the contrary. I mean, migration has proven to be a very positive factor for these very positive figures in terms of growth for Spain. And you can look at them in absolute terms, so how much it has contributed to growth, how much it has contributed to growth in per capita terms as well. There's an analysis from the Bank of Spain saying that between 0.4 and 0.7 percentage points of per capita growth for the past 3 years, which per capita growth in total was around 3 percentage points, 0.4 to 0.7 were due to migration, were thanks to migration.
But some argue it's because the vast majority of migrants coming to Spain are coming from Latin America, so there's a cultural, linguistical also to common ground. Some would say there are some cultures that are more difficult to assimilate than others, and that is a problem. When you hear that, is there an undertone of racism in it?
Well, there is.
You think the migration policy coming out of the European Union has an undertone of racism?
No, I think those sort of statements have an undertone of racism, and I think we should really combat that through data and through evidence. And you know, what those statements or what that evidence tells to me is that the better the integration policies, the greater the positive impact.
The focus is on returns in Europe. Is the migration policy wrong now, this turn?
So, you know, from the Spanish perspective, that's somehow the best way for us to be able to understand or put these discussions forward. What we know is that the bigger the effort in terms of integrating migrants, through regular flows, the bigger the impact in social but also in economic terms. And when
And
we
irregular, is there a second chance, or is this just a question of returning people back to their country? That's what was agreed this week.
You know, when we think about the Spanish case, you mentioned, for example, people from Latin America. 70% of the migration flows are coming to Spain from Latin America. But you know, when you ask people, there is a disconnect between the data and the reality in terms of migration, and that leads immediately towards a more negative bias in terms of accepting positive migration policies or integration policies. And let me just give you the data. So this survey, which was run last May by a think tank in the Basque Country, was asking Spanish people what they thought was the share of migrants in Spain. So the answer was twice the actual share of migrants. And they were asking what you think the unemployment rate within the migrant force is. And the answer, again, was twice the actual unemployment rate. And then the third question, which was very interesting, was what do you think is the share of migrants that is using transfers or subsidies or benefits from the state? And the answer was 5 times the actual rate. So again, there is a clear disconnect between the reality.
Why is that happening then?
Well, I think
who's to blame?
One of the elements that is happening is of course, these false narratives and this fake news in terms of the impact of migration that are leading towards a negative bias. And that's not grounded in data. And
there are no negative implications to migration for you?
Well, again, you just have to look at the figures. And in our case, when you look at the impact of migration, of course, there are challenges going forward. And the integration challenge is a key one. But you face that challenge by really betting on integration and development policies in origin countries to allow for those people to have job opportunities in their own countries, and therefore also reduce the danger that they have to endure by in coming to our countries in an irregular manner, and also reduce these irregular flows.
Well, Minister, thank you so much for joining us on Euronews.
My pleasure.